Victor Newman had always believed that power was something you held onto with both hands, no matter the cost. It was the principle that had guided his entire life, shaping every decision, every alliance, and every betrayal. But now, for the first time in years, Victor found himself standing on uncertain ground, and the cracks beneath him were growing wider by the day. Nikki Newman had reached her breaking point. For years, she had stood by Victor's side through countless storms. She had forgiven him when others would have walked away, defended him when his actions were indefensible, and loved him even when he made it difficult. But something had shifted. This time, Victor had crossed a line that Nikki could no longer ignore. His ruthless behavior toward Jack Abbott had not only reignited old rivalries, it had also reopened wounds that Nikki thought had long since healed. Watching Victor sink to such manipulative and destructive levels stirred something deep within her, something fierce and unyielding. She wasn't just hurt. She was done. "You expect loyalty," Nikki had said during their last confrontation, her voice trembling with emotion but her eyes blazing with resolve. "But loyalty isn't blind, Victor, not anymore." Victor had dismissed her words at first, brushing them off as temporary anger. In his mind, Nikki would come around, as she always did. She was his wife, his partner, his queen, and queens in Victor's world ultimately stood beside their king. But this time, Nikki wasn't standing beside him. She was walking away. And she wasn't walking alone. Jack Abbott had never imagined he would find himself aligning with Nikki Newman of all people. Their shared history was complicated, layered with past romance, betrayal, and lingering resentment. But sometimes, the most unexpected alliances were forged in the heat of shared purpose. And right now, they had one thing in common: Victor Newman needed to be stopped. Jack didn't take pleasure in Victor's downfall, not entirely. There was a part of him that still respected his longtime rival, a part that recognized the empire Victor had built from nothing. But Jack also knew that Victor's unchecked power had caused far too much damage over the years. So now it had cost him Nikki. That was something Jack couldn't ignore. "Nikki deserves better," Jack had said quietly one evening as they sat across from each other, the weight of their decision hanging heavy in the air. "And so does your family." Nikki had nodded, her expression resolute. "This isn't just about revenge, Jack, it's about accountability." But deep down, she knew revenge was part of it. How could it not be? Victor had taken everything too far this time. He had pushed, manipulated, and bulldozed his way through people's lives without considering the consequences. And now, for once, he was going to face them. Together, Nikki and Jack began to form a plan. The target wasn't just Victor, it was everything he had lost. Newman Enterprises. The company that had once been Victor's greatest pride now stood under the control of Phyllis Summers. It was an outcome that no one could have predicted, least of all Victor himself. Phyllis, with her cunning mind and fearless ambition, had seized the opportunity and transformed it into her own empire. But Phyllis was also vulnerable. She had made enemies along the way, burned bridges that couldn't easily be rebuilt, and Nikki and Jack intended to use that to their advantage. "If we can find leverage," Jack said, packing slowly as he considered their options, "something strong enough to shake her confidence, we might be able to force her hand." Nikki leaned forward, her mind already racing ahead. "Or we don't just force her hand, we take control entirely." Jack stopped in his tracks, studying her carefully. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life," Nikki replied. "Victor thinks he can do whatever he wants without consequences. It's time he learns otherwise." The idea was bold, risky, potentially explosive. And that was exactly why it might work. Their first step was information. Phyllis's rise to power hadn't been entirely clean, no takeover ever was. There were always secrets, always skeletons buried beneath the surface. The challenge was finding them before anyone else did. That's where the mysterious AI program came in. Rumors had been circulating about its capabilities: advanced analytics, predictive modeling, and access to sensitive corporate data. If Nikki and Jack could gain access to it, they might uncover exactly what they needed to bring Phyllis to her knees. Think about it, Jack said. With the right data, we could anticipate her moves before she even makes them. Nikki's eyes gleamed with determination, or expose something she doesn't want the world to see. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Genoa City, Victor was beginning to sense that something wasn't right. He had lost the company, he had lost Nikki. But Victor Newman was not a man who stayed down for long. Sitting alone in his office, he stared out at the skyline, his expression dark and contemplative. Every instinct he had was telling him that forces were moving against him, quietly, deliberately. And he didn't like it. Find out what Jack Abbott is up to, he instructed one of his trusted associates, and keep an eye on Nikki. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. Keep an eye on Nikki. The very idea that she might be working against him was something Victor had struggled to accept, but the signs were there, impossible to ignore. She had changed, and Victor wasn't sure he liked who she was becoming. As the days passed, tensions began to rise across Genoa City. Adam, Victoria, and Nick Newman all sensed that something bigger was unfolding. Their family had weathered countless storms before, but this one felt different, more personal, more dangerous. "What's going on with Mom?" Victoria asked during a tense family gathering. "She's barely speaking to Dad." Nick shook his head. "Whatever it is, it's serious." Adam, ever the observer, leaned back with a thoughtful expression. "Or maybe it's necessary." Both Victoria and Nick turned to him, surprised. "Necessary," Victoria repeated. Adam shrugged slightly. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to Dad." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Because deep down, they all knew Adam might be right. Back at Jabot, Jack and Nikki were taking their first concrete steps toward their plan. Meetings were held behind closed doors, conversations carefully guarded. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed against potential consequences. They couldn't afford mistakes. Not with so much at stake. But as their plan began to take shape, an unexpected ally entered the picture. Kane Ashby. Kane had his own reasons for wanting Victor to pay. His history with the Newman family was complicated, filled with its own share of betrayals and grievances. And when he learned about Nikki and Jack's intentions, he saw an opportunity. "I want in," Kane said simply. Jack exchanged a glance with Nikki. "This isn't a game, Kane." "I know that," Kane replied, "but Victor has gotten away with too much for too long. It's time someone stopped him." Nikki studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "All right, but we do this my way." Kane smirked slightly. "Wouldn't expect anything less." With Kane on board, their plan gained new momentum. But so did the risks. Because the more people involved, the harder it became to keep everything under control. And Victor Newman was already watching. Very closely. As the pieces began to move into place, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a power struggle anymore. It was war. And in war, there were always casualties. The tension in Genoa City reached a level that few could ignore. What had started as quiet whispers and subtle moves behind the scenes was quickly evolving into something far more dangerous. Lines were being drawn, alliances tested, and loyalties questioned. And at the center of it all stood Nikki Newman. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting to Victor's actions, she was anticipating them. Every decision she made was calculated, deliberate, and driven by a clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. There was no hesitation anymore, no second guessing. This was about taking control. Jack Abbott could see the transformation in her, and while part of him admired her strength, another part of him worried about where it might lead. Nikki had always been resilient, but this version of her was sharper, colder, willing to do whatever it took. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked one evening as they reviewed their latest strategy. Nikki didn't look up from the documents in front of her. "I've never been more sure." You know Victor won't just sit back and let this happen. At that, Nikki finally met his gaze. I'm counting on it. Across town, Victor was already making his move. He had uncovered enough to confirm his suspicions. Nikki and Jack were working together. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else, not just because of Jack, but because Nikki had chosen to stand against him so openly. Victor wasn't used to losing control. And he certainly wasn't used to losing Nikki. They think they can outmaneuver me, Victor muttered under his breath as he reviewed a file his associate had handed him. They've forgotten who they're dealing with. His retaliation began quietly. A series of strategic calls, a few well-placed legal inquiries, subtle pressure applied in just the right places. Victor didn't need to act loudly, his influence spoke for itself. But Nikki and Jack had anticipated that. Their access to the AI program had begun to yield results, more than they had hoped for: patterns in Phyllis's business dealings, irregularities in financial movements, and most importantly, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. This is it, Jack said, his voice low but steady as he reviewed the data. If this gets out, Phyllis won't be able to hold on to the company. Nikki nodded, her expression unwavering. Then we make sure she knows exactly what's at stake. The confrontation with Phyllis was inevitable. When it finally happened, it was as explosive as anyone could have predicted. Phyllis stared at Nikki and Jack, her eyes narrowing as she processed what they were implying. You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? It's not a threat, Nikki replied coolly. It's an opportunity. For what? To hand over everything I've built? Jack stepped forward to avoid losing everything. Phyllis laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind it. You don't have anything on me. Nikki slid a folder across the table. Phyllis hesitated before opening it, and as she scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. This is nothing, she said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. Are you willing to test that in court? Nikki asked. Silence filled the room. For the first time, Phyllis realized she was cornered. The days that followed were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal maneuvering, and high-stakes decisions. Phyllis fought back as much as she could, but the pressure was relentless. Every move she made seemed to be anticipated, countered before it could gain traction. Victor, meanwhile, found himself facing resistance at every turn. Jack's legal groundwork had been more thorough than he expected. Documents had been filed, safeguards put in place, barriers that even Victor couldn't easily break through. You're locking me out of my own company, Victor said during a heated confrontation with Jack. Jack didn't flinch. You lost your claim the moment you let things spiral out of control. Victor's gaze shifted to Nikki. And you're just going to stand there and let him do this? Nikki held his stare, her voice steady. No, Victor, I'm leading this. The words hit harder than anything else. For a moment, something flickered in Victor's eyes: anger, disbelief, and something else, something closer to hurt. But it vanished just as quickly. This isn't over, Victor warned. No, Nikki agreed quietly, it's not. The final outcome came faster than anyone expected. Phyllis, faced with the mounting evidence and the very real threat of legal consequences, made her decision. It wasn't one she wanted to make, but it was the only one she could. Control of Newman Enterprises changed hands. And in a move that stunned nearly everyone, Nikki Newman stepped into the role of CEO. The announcement sent shockwaves through Genoa City. Adam was the first to react, a mixture of surprise and intrigue crossing his face. I didn't see that coming. Victoria was less composed. Mom, running Newman. Nick simply shook his head. Dad is not going to take this well. They were right. Victor's reaction was immediate and explosive. You think this is a victory? He demanded when he confronted Nikki in her new office. You think this will last? Nikki stood behind the desk, composed and unwavering. I'm not trying to prove anything to you, Victor. I'm doing what needs to be done. And shutting me out is part of that. Yes. The single word hung heavily between them. Victor took a step closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake. Nikki didn't back down. No, I've been making mistakes for years by letting you get away with everything. This time I'm choosing differently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Years of history, love, pain, and conflict seemed to fill the space between them. You've changed, Victor said finally. Nikki's expression softened, but only slightly. Maybe I finally have. Victor studied her, searching for something familiar, something he could still hold on to. But what he saw was someone stronger, someone no longer willing to bend to his will. And that unsettled him more than anything else. As the dust began to settle, the consequences of their actions became clear. The Newman family was divided in ways it hadn't been before. Loyalties were uncertain, trust was fragile. Jack, though satisfied with the outcome, couldn't ignore the complications that lay ahead. This isn't over, he admitted to Nikki. Victor will come back swinging. I know, Nikki replied, and when he does, I'll be ready. But beneath her confidence, there was something else, a quiet hope that things wouldn't have to stay this way forever. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the conflict, Nikki still loved Victor. And somewhere deep down, Victor still loved her. That was the one thing neither of them could change. In the weeks that followed, Victor began to regroup. He was already laying the groundwork for his next move, already planning how to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. But this time, things were different. Because this time, Nikki wasn't standing beside him. She was standing against him. And for the first time in a long time, Victor Newman had to face the possibility that winning might come at a cost he wasn't willing to pay. Their story was far from over. If anything, it had only just begun. If you enjoy Y&R spoilers, updates, and daily drama, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos.